And hopefully you'll have something pop up on your screen that says you consent to that. All right, let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for being present in this space as you are present in all spaces where we gather. We ask your wisdom as we explore the book that we have read throughout the summer, and as we go deeper into the content, into the ways that it can inspire us to act in building your kingdom so that it better reflects your vision and your mission. Be with us this evening as we talk. Be with us this evening after we talk, and be with us forevermore. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, and through your Holy Spirit, we pray. Amen. All right. Welcome, Susan.
I'm coming.
So to get us started, I am going to have us introduce ourselves, so that will require some unmuting as we go around the space. Since I can see all of you, and I know that our screens will be in different orders on our various devices, I will call upon you and invite you to share your name, either your congregation or the body that you would say that you are coming from to be part of this discussion, and your reason for having participated in this book study. And again, you're welcome here regardless of whether or not you read the full book or read any of the book. You can still be part of this discussion. So your name, your congregation, or the body which you are representing and being here, and your reason for having participated in this. So I will go around the room as I see it on my screen, and we'll start with you, Marjorie.
The oldest always gets to go first. My birth order at home and my family. Marjorie Reinch, while I'm stated clerk of this presbytery, I'm also a member from Auburn Presbyterian Church, clear over on the east side of Indiana. And I read the book Waking Up White, and when this one came out, I decided to load it onto my Kindle, and I've been reading it. I've got about, it says I have about 150 pages to go, but I'm somewhere around 42% finished with it. But I'm reading it so that I can continue to learn and continue to be responsive and responsible to persons who I might perceive as different than myself.
Okay. Thank you, Marjorie. Next up on my screen is Ellen.
Yeah, I'm on the Committee on Representation, and I'm also an elder at Bethany Presbyterian Church, and in charge of the neighboring team, which ministers to our area around our church, but also to the city as well, and on the mission team. And to me, our neighborhood is quite diverse. We have a number of Blacks in the area, and Hispanics and whites and others that are in that Vinton area. And I think sometimes we don't know how to reach out to people, or what to say or how to approach things. And I think when I read that Waking Up White and thought this is a good jump from that. My daughter had this online in her church last spring, and the little bit that I saw of it, I thought, well, that's a really good book. So I'm hoping that we can do some more with our church in introducing them to this and other areas of racism. We have some LGBT, the whole works there, people in our church, as well as some transgenders, and how better to relate to them as well as people who are immobilized. So that's where I come from.
Thank you, Ellen. Next on my screen, I have Susan.
My name is Susan Briette. I am on the Committee of Representation, and I'm also part of a new worshiping community, a work in progress in Lafayette, Indiana. Before that, I was a member of Bethany Presbyterian Church. I am reading it because I really want to find out and uncover that implicit bias within myself and try indeed to be a better person, and to be able to talk about it with others in a way that they can understand and get their head around, as we together try to be more inclusive.
Thank you. Next, I have Mike.
I'm Mike Pennon, and I'm pastor at First Presbyterian in Hammond. I think this book was taking in terms of starting from the place that you have your values in the right place, but really want to be more awake to how you're truly relating to other people and what things you might be, what missteps you might be taking, even if you have got the right values. I like the social science approach. I studied sociology in college. I kind of like taking that approach to things as well. So it felt like, truthfully, it felt like a book challenged me without attacking me, and I didn't feel ready to be attacked. So I thought maybe I could deal with the challenge, and it's been about right.
Thank you, Mike. Next, I have Heather.
I'm Heather Cassiano, and I'm part of the faith family at First in Highland with Tyler and Jean and Jay. And I'm interested in reading the book, which I admit I only got to chapter 3 so far, but still in progress. Just to kind of continuing education for me, I'm married to a Hispanic man, and some of his family is very Spanish speaking Hispanic culture and some is not. So just continuing to help me relate to family. I've done a lot of work with other cultures, other people. Right after college, I worked in the low-income areas in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with predominantly Black and Hispanic communities. I worked with 3 different Indian reservations in Wisconsin. I lived in southern New Mexico in a very Hispanic population where I was the minority. But because I don't belong to any of those communities, I'm always aware that I don't know them as well as I could. I don't know if I am thinking correctly or being sensitive the way I should be. So books like these, and this book especially, appealed to me because it was not specifically African American and white, that duality there, that it could apply to any area, any type of inclusion or exclusion, and just how I perceive things that I may not be aware of. So.
Thank you, Heather. Next on my screen, I have David.
Yeah, my name is David Smook, and I live in Rochester, Indiana, retired pastor, and I live in a white area. So coming across any person of color even is rare here. We do go to South Carolina in the winter, and we had our choice of Presbyterian churches down there to attend, and we visited a prominently white congregation, and we visited a prominently Black congregation. we got excited by the Black congregation and been going there ever since for the last 5 years now, and have become part of that family. My problem is that I don't know how I fit in, or if I fit in. Of course, I don't know how I fit in the Southern culture much either. Although I did go to Maryville College in Maryville, Tennessee, and Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. I feel awkward. Well, that's not exactly true. I feel encouraged and excited when I'm in South Carolina with my Black brothers and sisters there, and enjoy it and enjoy the worship a lot. So I'm always trying to deal with my biases, trying to figure out what they are. And I've figured some of them out. That's not too hard to do, unfortunately. But this book helps me look at not only color biases, but economic biases and a myriad of them that I have. Farm versus city, all kinds of things. So I'm interested in discovering biases, and then how do you work with those biases, or how do you find out a way to discover those biases so that you can deal with them in a way that is moral and ethical. And so I'm glad to be a part of this group. I wish I'd have been doing it all summer, but this is my first time to discuss, and so I'm interested in that.
Well, thank you, David. We're glad you're here. Next, I have Jean and Jay, and I'll let you two determine who goes first and who goes second.
Well, all I can say is ditto to David. I mean, really, it's the same thing. The biases is what I want, right? And it isn't just race. Race is a big part, but there's more emphasis on that. But there's a lot of other biases I have against, knowingly and unknowingly, just as he said, against other situations. And I was hoping that the book would give me some concrete information on how to deal with them.
And I guess you all said such nice things, such good things. I mean, so encompassing. I don't know if I can say it quite like you did. I always thought I was real open-minded and very accepting of other people. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, wow, some of that stuff fits me. I was a school teacher, and I always often said, I don't see color in my classroom. When they asked me how many Blacks do you have in your class, I would go, I have to think about that, because it didn't affect me. But then when I read this, I think there's some things that made me realize that I do have bias. Don't get me wrong. I know that as I read this thing too. And I don't mean to be that way, but I also want to know how to relate to people that are different than me, as some of you had said, and grow and learn. And like I said, I only got about halfway done. So hopefully some of those answers are in the second half of the book.
All right. Thank you, Jean and Jay. Jennifer?
Well, I was delighted when Ellen brought this book to the Committee on Representation, because I think it really does check all the boxes. A great, accessible book that has some helpful vocabulary to name some of the things that I know I've struggled with, and I'm with Mike. I think that I am guilty of some white fragility, and other kinds of fragility too, and bristle at being yelled at in print sometimes. And this book is it's helpful in naming some things that are very, very important as opportunities for growth. I think the one thing I wish, just because I always wish for books that that allow communities of faith to say, oh, I get the connection. The one thing I missed about this book was the theological framework, or at least some touchstone there. And I know that's not the purpose of this book at all. And yet, for me, it would have won all the awards if it was something we could offer as something that people who want the theological vocabulary included as well, instead of having to supply it. But I think it's pretty easy to make the case for this being a book that makes a whole lot of sense for faith communities to read and be a part of. And I hang out in the Presbytery of Wabash Valley. You're all my home congregations.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm Tyler Oram from First Presbyterian Church in Highland. And I participated as part of the Committee on Representation, of course, but I would have actively chosen to participate willingly as well. Because I'm always on the hunt for resources that will guide my own understanding of myself and the way I interact with the communities I live in and serve in. And I also am always on the search for resources that can be accessible to our congregation in Highland and to our church more writ large. I find myself, I am bivocational, so I am the pastor of the church here, and I also serve as a social worker in Chicago. And the communities I work in as a social worker tend to be communities of color, probably 99%. So, and the churches I've served in as a pastor and that I grew up in are primarily white congregations. And I am sure that I embody a lot of the various biases that are presented in the books in both settings in different ways. But I am always searching for the reasons why those divides exist, or why we are not always reflective of each other in both aspects in which I live and serve and work. And as I read the book, I learned that I also was supposed to read it because of the grace that it gives in helping to tear down some defenses that I have when it comes to these conversations and when it comes to being the moral person or ethical person that I think that I am. And I know that Stolly Chu's field of expertise is what she calls bounded ethics. So the book was something that I would have participated in regardless of my role in this Committee on Representation. So I am going to launch us into the discussion. I want to make the point that I know that often when folks who represent the majority culture and dominant culture or dominant part of society have book studies, there's sometimes a critique that what good is a book study if it doesn't actually lead to action. So my hope is that within this discussion, we will be able to focus quite significantly on ways that we can act, or that we can brainstorm individually, congregationally, presbytery-wide, ways that we can be better agents of change or transformation when it comes to the discussion of anti-racism and the work of anti-racism. So if we are, but I do want us to discuss some of the content of the book. So as we go along, if I notice our time is shortening on the discussion component where we're talking about the content, I may cut us off a bit prematurely so that we can get more to the action talk. So just a warning to you all. The way I see us going through this discussion, we have a good number for what I'll call mutual invitation. So I will pose some questions and I will then invite somebody to share their response, and they are welcome to do so. If they would like to, they're welcome to say I don't accept that invitation at this time. But if so, then when you have given your response, you can invite somebody else, now that we all know each other, to share as well. And I have found that to be an equitable way to go about things. And you always have the option to say, oh, I would prefer not to accept that invitation or answer that question at this point. So feel free to refuse the invitation, but we will do discussion based on mutual invitation. So my opening question is a broad one. This book was most significant to you. So if you could pull out one point, and I know we're all at different stages in our reading, so it can be wherever you are. If you could pull out one point that was most impactful or significant or meaningful to you on your own journey, what point would that be? I'll give us a few seconds to think through that, because I don't want to call on somebody just 1 second after asking the question. But again, what point or piece of data that she presents or argument that she puts out there was most impactful, meaningful, important, significant to you as the reader? And I will invite Susan.
For me, the most impactful portion of the book was the she talked about a young woman who went to college, and she didn't understand why Black persons at that time felt that they that she was privileged. She didn't understand the sense of privilege that she had. And then she later on became, I believe, a social worker, or had more opportunity to learn about other people's experiences. And she saw the difference between how her great-grandfather and grandfather and father were privileged because of what had happened a while back. I mean, that's privilege builds up and keeps continuing to build up. And that was, for me, just seeing that difference in those two different stories between her and maybe other people with whom she encountered was very helpful in understanding what privilege means. And so oftentimes you hear people say that I worked hard for this, that I don't, they need to work as hard as I do, and that they'll be successful. But that's not, I mean, we all have been built up a lot of privilege that helps us in doing whatever, and some people cannot, it's not possible often to rise to that level of what we expect from others. And that was helpful to me.
And Susan, can you invite somebody else to share?
Ellen, would you be willing to share?
We'll need you to unmute yourself, Ellen.
Sorry about that. I lost myself on my phone. I was on my homepage. I thought, where's the screen? Trying to get back to you all. Wow, yeah, this whole book, as I went through it, she kind of starts at the very beginning. I'm a good person, and they think, oh yeah, I'm a good person, and then points out all the different areas that we don't realize that we have biases. But I like as she does that, then she progresses in how to talk and stuff. I think one of the things, look out for these 4 good intentions. find myself doing that so much, some of these good intentions and not realizing what I'm really doing is putting people down. And then if they take it wrong, I'm saying, well, I do this and then it becomes all about myself instead of about their situation. And it's made me really lots more aware of a lot of the innate stuff that I've had from being brought up. And my family was really very caring and stuff about other groups and things. I mean, they tried to teach us to be non-judgmental and to accept everybody, regardless of color or anything else. But that deep down, you get in a dark black area of excuse me, of a city, and all of a sudden you realize that your door's not locked. Somebody says, we hear you locking those doors at the intersections. I thought, oh gosh, that kind of thing. One of the things I think was helpful is that she said, don't be so hard on yourself. We all make mistakes, and try to listen and to say, well, I'm sorry, this apparently has bothered you. How can I be better at it? And I think teaching us how to have the conversation, to engage that way, and also how do you steer the conversation and educate and occasionally confront. I like the thing of the 66 or some, they say the 20% and the 20% or something like that, the ones that are, they're with you. Then you have the ones that are definitely, they aren't going to be moved. But you have that middle section that's often very silent, but they're the ones that you need to appeal to talk to when you're talking about other things. And that is something said to someone like a Black person, or how do I want to say this? That you speak up as a white person and say, I don't agree with you. I think that you've hurt that person. And a lot of times the people who are silent in that quiet majority look and start thinking, oh gosh, do I act like that too? That really has hurt that person. And I think this is what Dolly Chu does very well. She's very good at showing the different areas where there's problems, but also how you can deal with them in those later chapters. And from being somebody who believes, but then how do you build? And that's what I would like to do more in our congregation, in outreach into our community. Let's see, I don't have all the peoples on here. I would like to ask David Smoke to join in.
Okay, Alan, good to see you, by the way. Two of the things that impressed me, well, first of all, the book, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, is such a common Midwestern, particularly, I think, construct that somehow, by golly, I got the determination, I just pull myself up, and not recognize that so much else has gone into that. So I really resonated, Susan, when you talked about that. The part that I had the most questions about, I think, were the whole idea of color blindness. I was always taught that people are people and they're not various colors. They are people, and we have a lot more in common than what we have that separates us. But I realize that each culture has its strengths, and that to say you cannot be a person of color is to take away identity. And there's, I see myself walking a really fine line in there of recognizing that yeah, you have pride in who you are, and that's a good thing. But also recognizing that, but look at what we have together. So just trying to wrap my head around that gets my head spinning. Trying to know how, yeah, you hate to be with somebody and not feel comfortable just talking your mind and feel like I've got to word everything just right so that where my bias is entering into this that are making me be a real asshole. Hope you don't mind that word, but it fits. So she's taking me through that. I'm not to that point yet where I see her reconciling that's going on in my mind. But that's where I am. And so I'm going to pass this over to Heather.
I think like Susan and David, that story about the bootstraps and that different perspective of privilege, and then, well, what if it was a different skin color in the same situation? And I think that stuck out to me a lot because of timing, because when I read that section, I had listened to, not on purpose, but I had heard a sermon by Skye Jitani, who is an evangelical pastor out of Wheaton, Illinois, and he was talking about this idea of picking yourself by your bootstraps to get going and make something of yourself, and that's not at all a biblical concept. And a lot of times we like to think it is. And so it just really kind of hit me. And then with the example of this woman and talking about her grandfather in the military and stuff, both of my grandfathers were in World War II, and they were both came from dairy farming families in central rural Wisconsin. And that was a big part of their story, is that, you know, their immigrant family came over and just picked themselves up by their bootstraps, and, you know, started with one cow and, you know, a little piece of land, and built it up and provided for their family. And then as I've encountered other people, that idea that not everybody has boots to have bootstraps to pull up on, that some people are starting with absolutely nothing. And as I pay attention to current events, I see that, and trying to recognize my own biases or biases I've listened to because of the media. You know, we've got the Indigenous and Native American people, and with the ongoing searches at boarding schools for their loved ones, and their stories of what happened to their boots and their bootstraps. We've right here in Indiana, we have Afghan refugees. Where are they, and who are they as a people? Are they the people that the media tell us they are, or not? You know, I may never get down there to actually meet them in person, but how can I still have a better understanding of who they are? And so that section really stood out to me in light of current events, especially. Let's see. I would invite Jean.
Well, there were several stories. Like I said, I haven't finished. I think what I'm reading about now is headwinds and tailwinds. And I guess I realize how many tailwinds I've had in my life. And thinking about, it's made me more aware to think about people of color and how they don't have that same opportunity, and they have all these headwinds hitting them that don't allow them to do the same things that I've been able to do in my life. That's one thing. And the other one was when you're talking to a person of color or somebody that is racist, and you're trying to have a discussion with them, instead of just saying, I don't agree with you, or getting defensive, or not confronting would be my situation. But instead of saying, well, that part she said, listen to them and ask, why do you feel that way? I want to know more about where you're at. Please let me know what's going on with you. And that's something that I need to learn to do better at. And then one other thing that struck me was at the very beginning, because of being a teacher, that part about names and how when you don't know how to pronounce someone's name. I learned really very beginning when I was teaching, if I didn't learn how to pronounce a person's name, I wouldn't call on them. So whenever I had a name I couldn't pronounce, I made a point, probably to extreme, of saying, okay, let me say it again. Let me say your name again, because I didn't always do a good job with that, but you tend to avoid those people. And that a name is very important to a person. That's part of their identity. So those were the things that I jumped out at me. And that Harvard test too. I thought I was going to really be okay there, and I didn't do good. I couldn't believe they could tell milliseconds apart when you're trying to choose which was good, which was bad situation. So, oh, I have to do something here. Okay. Marjorie.
Well, Jean, you took my example. I was partially because of experience, and partially because people always butcher my last name. I was really the example early on in the book about names. I agree with Jean. That is part of people's identity. And it is so important to call people by their correct name. Don't shorten it unless they give you permission to do so, because it is part of their identity. And when years ago, I had experience with having a couple of Hispanics that worked at the same hotel that I worked at. And because nobody could pronounce their names, they were Joe and Mike, and I was like one day handing them their checks, and it's like, why do you do this? Why do you go by, Joe and Mike? But it's what everybody had tagged them with without really, getting to know them and call them by their proper name. However, if you have been around any Chinese, they love having English names, and they don't want you to call them anything but what they've decided is going to be their English name. So you have to be aware of cultures, but you also have to honor people. And I think that's where that we can start getting rid of some of our biases, is to take the time and care enough about somebody else to know how to properly pronounce their name, or know what they want to be identified by. Don't shorten their name if they don't want it shortened. I've had to, I can tell from my own experience what's happened with me, but others who are, maybe they're from a different culture, or their ethnicity gives them, they have different sounding names. They can't all be English sounding names or white names.
All right, Marjorie, thank you. Can you invite somebody?
Jay.
I think everybody's covering a lot, but I was a little disappointed in the book in some ways, because there wasn't enough emphasis on the tail end about how do I get better at this. I mean, it's easy to sit around and read and to understand different cultures. I mean, I could read about different cultures, but it's an entirely different thing when you're starting to deal with them. And I need more concrete. I didn't think she gave me enough information as to how to change my actions so that I'm more understanding. And the one area that I've always found, because I've worked almost 30 years with a high percentage of Blacks. So I have a fairly good understanding, I think, of the Black culture, but I never worked with other cultures. And there's so many other cultures I would like to have exposure to. And it's not just race type cultures. I'm more interested also in things like socioeconomic culture. I have a real personal problem with the socioeconomic situation. And I give good lip service to it, but my actions don't match my my lips, let's put it that way, especially when it comes to that, or even different parts of our churches, you know, a progressive church versus a more fundamentalist church, things like that. And the only thing I don't think she answered my questions enough. Just, I'll be honest. That's all I can say. Yes, there was some good hints on personal things when you're dealing with someone, but I was expecting more from the book than I got. I'll be, you know, sorry.
No, don't be sorry. We appreciate the feedback. And we do have a few more people. Will you invite Jay?
Oh, Jennifer.
I think the thing for me that stood out as something I'll take away and think about again and again and use again and again is the way in which the author talks about bystanders and believers and builders. I thought that was helpful language, and one of the ways in which she starts to point to the change we can affect. I thought she had a lot of good ideas and some pretty pointed stuff toward the end about the conversations we can have and participate in and encourage and listen in on. Because I think that as people who consider ourselves to be good white people, we can do so much more. And there was so much encouragement in this book to say more, to do more, to learn more, to be more. And so that whole bystander, believer, builder piece, I thought was really strong. And let's see.
I know that Mike has not gone yet.
And I'd like to call on Mike and invite him.
Right, so someone mentioned some time ago the 20, 60, 20 split between those who are ready to get on board with new thinking, the large group in the middle, and the bottom group who are just not going to change their mind. I found that helpful. Truthfully, it was helpful to be able to say, okay, this particular group isn't going to change their mind anyway. They're not open. So who can you spend some time with? You know, where is your energy best spent? And I should say that's a good framework, but then for me actually to engage in the way, you know, she's prompting us to engage, that will still be more of a challenge to me. Which maybe ties into the other thing, something that David said. I think, David, you wanting to say things the right way and you know, not wanting to mess up and say something that might. I'm somebody who tends to want to do things right, period. And so that would include conversation with people who are different from myself. And the encouragement in this book is risk the mistakes. and it's kind of a cycle in a way, because I think for me to feel that I can risk saying the wrong things means that I have to establish a relationship where they will trust me to have the right intentions, and where I will trust them not to jump on me. But for me to develop that trust with them, I'm going to have to take some risks. So that's, but I think that kind of openness and trusting is something for me to work with. So I think that's all of us.
Thank you all for participating in that opening question. And as I said, according to our time, I'll have us jump to action because we're already there on our brief time that we have together. So the rest of the discussion points I had were touched upon by all of you in your responses to that question. And some themes that I have heard come up are the complexity of diversity itself. So the fact that there are a lot of intersections of identities, and it's a complicated, complex thing to try to think about the many identities we have within our society and within the world, and the truth as Christians that God has given us our identities and their beloved aspects of our created selves. So as we think about what it means to be inclusive, to be transformative, to talk with each other, to relate with each other, it's complicated. I want to acknowledge that. So I heard that come up. And I have also heard themes that we have, myths that we ourselves have grown up with. The bootstraps have come up a lot. And that we have our own authentic selves and contexts that are part of us that we bring to any conversation and that we bring to the table. That's important to honor that and to think about how we want to present ourselves and talk about ourselves. And taking risks is big. I appreciated your critique there, Jay, of not having enough action to consider here. So I want us to be willing to take risks and to discuss actions that we could consider. The reason the Committee on Representation is having this study to begin with was to interact and to embody our Matthew 25 mission as a presbytery. And I know that some of our congregations are part of, and particularly the aspect of dismantling structural racism, and to see what we can do to be active in that work that we're called to in the gospel. And I know that this book itself was not a religious book, and it didn't claim to be, but we ourselves are here as part of the church and representing the body of Christ. And I think we do have a particular lens through which we've probably read this, and a particular power that we can bring to enacting some of the learnings that we might have. Something that was salient to me or significant to me was her conversation on light and heat, and how those are two orientations for action. Light being perhaps a way of shining upon the data, which she presents herself as somebody who orients her action through the lens of light. So making people aware, bringing people to awareness of what's happening and what needs to be done. And then heat, she presents as more kind of like protest action, or action that seeks to kind of burn the system, or to push people into the awareness of needing to do something and needing to change. And I think as the church, we can look at both of those orientations for action. So I'm not going to have us do the invitation model for our action conversation, but I want us to brainstorm. I'll give us just a couple minutes a piece. So I want a couple of minutes for each little sphere I'm going to bring up. So I want us to think individually what action we need to do based on learnings in this book, or just things that have come up in our own conversation with the book. I want us to think congregationally. So within our congregations, what do we need to do based on our newly realized or perhaps newly supplemented understanding of implicit bias, or of diversity and inclusion, and what we need to do better to be more faithful to our gospel as presented in Matthew 25. And then as a presbytery, we are here as the community of the presbytery. What do we need to do? So I don't need to have everybody speak to all of these, but we'll start with 2 minutes on some individual things that we can do. And again, this is brainstorming so that we can take these and then carry these on within the various spheres. So individually, what are some things that we can do? And we'll just kind of rapid fire these. So feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
Well, I'll just use a quick example, and this related to her speaking about networking. That, like, for example, right now I need to find a photographer to do a picture of me. It'd be natural to go through networks I already have, but since I have some Black friends and associates, to recommend somebody, an African-American photographer, for example, just to try to build my network a little bit and to give that person some business.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole idea of risking is important to me. Trust that the other person's not going to blast you for saying the wrong thing. If you go in with that idea, it's saying you don't have the tools to deal with me in a humane way, which is a convoluted way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think trying to do a better job of listening to people who are different than myself without my biases taking over the thought process or the listening process, not to assume I know where they're coming from or exactly what they mean in the words that they say, and asking better questions.
Others, feel free to unmute yourselves and jump in. Oh, Ellen, you're muted. I see you talking there.
The colorblind issue, people say that, oh, I don't see color, that kind of thing. I was thinking of perhaps like doing movies or something of different ethnic groups or nationalities that are, popular movies, perhaps, that we could discuss, and then or invite people from other churches that are not the same as ours to come and join us in these movies, perhaps, and talk about what they feel. And I agree, I don't remember which person it was, but talking, really listening and trying to see and to feel where they're coming from, to try to understand where people are coming from. That's the hard part. And as David says, you don't know if you're saying the right thing, and you're coming in and that taking that risk and going with good intentions. But when you find somebody does, kind of blocks you out, then saying, hey, something I said really bothered you, tell me about it. And that's what I would like to get more sensitive to, instead of being defensive, that I'm trying to do thing and then they have to try to placate me. And it's, in other words, make it about their situation because it is about their concern. That's I'd like to get some discussions like that somehow in our churches. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead, Ellen.
Fine. Yeah, it's pretty stuff. Yeah.
I
Also,
was just gonna, go ahead.
in the community, if there's ways that we can find out if there are areas that, like realtors, if there are still distinctions. When I sold my house, I was kind of surprised. It was a Black family that bought the house, and that deep dive thing, deep down, I thought, oh my gosh, what will the neighbors think? That thing that raised up from my Wisconsin upbringing about, the Blacks moving in and all the prices go down and stuff like that. Another one of those things that you realize in your culture that you grew up with, you're trying to banish that kind of stuff and not think that way. And apparently everybody gets along really well, but that was something that hit me when I thought, oh dear, what will the neighbors worry about?
Yeah.
Try to talk through that and how to get rid of that kind of thinking. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah. No, and Ellen, you have beautifully segued us into talking some about our congregations and the way that churches can be or can enact or embody some of the learnings from this book. So what are some other, again, just unmute yourself and share some ways that our churches or congregations need to act or can act based on learnings from this book?
Find out who's in your community. Do some, we called it windshield survey. Just ride around, see who's around, see who needs to, who do you need to go to? Not who needs to come to us, but who do I need to go to?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Any other ideas? I know Ellen had talked about some movies, discussion-based things, and intentional conversation. Who else has something to share about what our congregations or churches can do?
I think if we're always looking for opportunities to have even just fellowship, it doesn't have to be a heavy discussional thing. I know Tyler and I have talked sometimes in relation to our youth group, but all the different types of houses of worship we have in our area that aren't necessarily just Christian denominations. And wouldn't that be neat to be able to invite, let's say a Baha'i temple or, some Muslim folks to come and just either have a meal or a fun time of fellowship and just get to know them as fellow humans, regardless of their set of beliefs. And just say, hey, what does your family like to do? Here's what my family likes to do. And just open those doors without always having to have such heavy, deep conversations right from the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Play together, work together.
Mhm. I think, go ahead. Tyler, or everyone, I think what Heather said is really true. And we need to get people to come and intertwine with us in everything we do in the church. Try to team up with another church, have an Indian come over and fix dinner at our place or something, or have us invited there. Whatever it takes to get people together. We can't have isolation. So anything we can do there is just a positive. And one of the biggest positives I can see is that most of us, but a lot of us have extra rooms in the church. Those rooms can be converted to housing temporary migrants, or it doesn't even have to be an outside migrant from another country. It can be a lower person that just needs a foot up in the world, and use our facilities wisely and use our money wisely, instead of just leaving buildings sit empty.
Yeah. Anybody else for ways that our congregations? Yes, Susan.
Hopefully this will make sense, but as we deliberate about how we move forward as congregations for any reason, not just on this issue, for any reason, that to make this a question. I mean, how is our decisions impacting our community in terms of being more inclusive? I mean, what does this action say about who we are and how we're inclusive? I mean, making that somehow, and every single thing we do, trying to make sure we either ask the question or we think about not just our exclusive group. That happens a lot. It's very hard. Being part of a congregation, you're part of a family, so you think about each other. You don't think about outside, but start to try to really think about outside and how anything we deliberate, how do we become more inclusive in that and try to welcome others who are different from us?
And I would also add congregationally, I think it would be good for all of us to do a bit of structural analysis, meaning to take a look at who we have, who is in the front all the time, or who is on our boards, who shows up for worship, who is active, and take a look at our missions. What framework do we use? Are we one group serving another group, and do we envision that as kind of an otherized group? How do we kind of reinforce otherizing in the structures that we have? And why do we have siloed houses of worship? Why do we continue to be segregated houses of worship? And to really dig deep into that analysis, because there may be barriers that we've set up that we're not aware of, or there may be frameworks that we operate through that create segregation or block authentic connection. And I hear connection coming up over and over again as the ways that we need to proceed. So I would invite all of us to do kind of a structural analysis. And that doesn't mean that we have to criticize everything that exists within our houses of worship and within our church and within the body. Oh, I see Barbara joining us. But it does mean to take a critical look and to see why we are the way that we are, and what's good about that, and what do we need to change to be better, equitable, and connected people. And lastly, with the Presbytery, we have several representatives kind of in leadership with the Committee of Representation and within the Presbytery here, but all of us are the Presbytery. The Presbytery is made up of all of us. What can we do as a regional body to better serve the mission of dismantling structural racism, and specifically how we've been inspired by this book? What can we do as a broader part of the body of Christ? What opportunities do we have?
I think these conversations should be ongoing, and it shouldn't just be something that we do once, one and done. It should somehow, we should keep it in the forefront in some way, in some intentional way of, I know we do that in nominating committee, and always trying to have that to be a question about the providing that diversity in different committees and that we have, but some way of, in addition to those, maybe growing and always incorporating some way of being intentional about, not only about trying to foster diversity, but also to be intentional about thinking about our own biases and how do we overcome them.
Thank you. How about others? Any ideas about opportunities we have as a Presbytery?
Heather, I think everything you said about congregations is transferable to Presbytery, widening our circles, getting out of our Presbyterian silos and thinking about who our ecumenical and interfaith partners might be. Who are we learning from as a Presbytery? Who are we inviting to speak to us? How are we gleaning new insights about ourselves and others? It's all transferable, it seems to me. It's about not only modeling that with congregations, but with our wider communities. Who's the PCUSA in northern and central Indiana, and how are we displaying what it means to be a Matthew 25 mid-council?
Great. Any other thoughts on opportunities as a regional body of the church?
It seems like we are silos. A lot of our churches just exist for themselves, and racism is one thing. In middle Indiana, there are a few Black people. There are a number of Hispanic people. But even local churches don't go beyond themselves. You know, we try to invite each other, but we want them to come to us. It's all focused on what we're doing instead of what are we doing together. And this has been a bugaboo in my craw for years. why can't we learn that we're there for each other? We're not all alone out there, and so many congregations feel all alone. So somehow and that's that connectionalism, Jennifer, you're doing a wonderful job bringing us together. We need to work on that from our perspective within our local congregations.
I think we have opportunities the way we did on Saturday at Assembly to tell stories, because I see possibilities everywhere, and for every frustration of siloed thinking and siloed living, there are conversations happening across denominational lines in ways that weren't happening 2 years ago and 5 years ago. And I think the more we tell those stories, the more we encourage others to look for those things and to be those dreamers and builders as well.
Yeah, and I would add, just as we've modeled invitation in our discussion tonight, as we look at light and heat, and we look at our congregations, as we look at ourselves as individuals, as we look at the presbytery, so we look at the church writ large, we have a lot of people who I think are probably waiting to be invited to do things or to become aware of things. So I would say we have communication in place within the presbytery, but we could make better use of it as we become aware of things that are happening in our communities or in the region, or actions that are taking place that we ourselves aren't leading, but could be great allies for, that we could support. We can somehow communicate those to each other. We have a group here that exists right now. We have some way to contact each other, but we can communicate through the newsletter, or you can contact me anytime as part of the Committee on Representation or the different folks who are active here, and we can distribute things. We can let people know, hey, there's this and this action taking place, and we can be great allies in this. Or we know that there's been this horrible thing that has happened, and people need to show up to grieve alongside of those who have been impacted. And let's do that. I think we can make better use of each other. And also, we've talked about taking risk. I think we can hold each other accountable in some senses. We can support each other and say, hey, we should have these conversations. We should talk. We should enter into this action that's happening, or we should analyze our institutions as they exist. And we can support each other in that. So I would encourage us to embody the learnings that we have had from the book in that sense, and to act. Absolutely. I think we have that opportunity before us. And I know that we here represent geographically, not the entirety of the presbytery, but quite a bit of it. And I'm sure we do so in many other intersections of identity as well. So I want to honor our time and recognize that we've gone well beyond our hour. But I also want to honor that this conversation is something that should be ongoing, as I've heard some say. So I welcome you to communicate to me, or we have other hubs of communication that we can continue on. We can keep our Facebook group open to continue. We don't have to shut it down. And if you're not part of that Facebook group, feel free to request an invitation to join. We can use that as a messaging board even. But if you have things that are happening in your communities, or we could set up a different type of messaging board for the community, for the Committee of Representation or the Presbytery, in terms of action, that might be a good idea. I don't want to speak for what actions should be taken, but I think we have opportunities here that we can come together and do more, and in doing more, to be more faithful to the gospel. So I see that Barbara has joined us. Welcome, Barbara. You've joined us right at the end here, but we're glad to see you. And I do want to bring us to a close. I get to close on my soapbox there because I was the convener, facilitator. Um, but I thank all of you for your participation today. And I hope that you will take some of these learnings and share them with your communities. I heard Jennifer mention that some congregations are hoping to do a fall study of the book. And if that is your congregation, great. If not, feel free to do so, or you're welcome to contact me if there are different types of books or resources that you would like to consider for your congregation, and I'm happy to help to support that as well. So I am going to invite Susan to close us in prayer. Would you be willing to do so, Susan?
Dear Holy God, thank you for this time to come together and have important conversation about how to mirror you and the way you love all of your children, and to help us to grow in being able to do the same thing. We thank you for the energy and efforts everybody has given this evening, and may these ideas continue to be with us, and the action, and strengthen and encourage us in our action as well, to actually act upon the ideas that we've discussed here, and to really become better people. We pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Thank you all for being so goodish. All right. We can stop recording now.